On today's episode, crits, road races, time trials, we discuss these events, who they're perfect for, dive into our 2025 goals, week 3 training updates, and Greg's got a hot take on the erg mode on the trainer.
Hey, welcome back to episode 3 of Bespoke Endurance, where Josh and I are two recreational riders on this journey to becoming racers. Before we get into everything we're going to talk about today, we want to give a quick shout out to Road ID. We are filming here at their headquarters.
Super grateful.
It's awesome that they're letting us use this. If you don't have a Road ID, you should absolutely have one on you when you're riding or doing any endurance trek of any kind. Head on over to roadid.com and check them out and order yours today.
Yep.
And Josh, let's get into it. What are we talking about today?
Oh man, I'm excited. Okay, so we are 3 weeks into our training. I just want to ask you first, how's it going?
3 weeks in, it's going good. So I take that back. It's not. It's been so cold here. So we're in the Cincinnati tri-state area, and we've had negative temps this week, a massive snowstorm last week. So I have not been outside since 2024. Like before Christmas, I think was the last time I was outside on a bike. You've braved the weather a little bit more.
One time.
And I'm going to throw a curveball at you because this isn't in our notes, but I'm going to ask you this. What is your temperature threshold for being outside? What does that look like for you?
I'm spoiled with Zwift because now that I have the trainer, I've a lot more hesitant on the weather degrees. I used to be braver in getting out in colder temperatures than I am, but I would say my lowest the lowest I'll go out is usually around 30 degrees. But anything above 30 degrees is it's definitely possible. In that 30 degrees to 35 is usually that okay, I'm debating whether I want to ride outside or not, but usually if it's below 30 degrees,
so
I don't want to do
30 to 35's maybe.
Yeah.
If people are out, for sure.
Yep, 100%.
Now,
cafe ride.
Is that absolutely a dry 30, or because you did a ride a week ago? I'm probably going to throw it up on the screen where you went out and it was 30 and it had just rained all night. It was wet.
Yeah. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was probably the smartest ride I've ever done. But here's the thing though, and you and I both are the same on this, where it's and most people would too. I would love to hear from you guys on this as well, but it's when you are in a climate like we're in right now, where it's we have not seen anything in terms of weather-wise that's been anywhere close to good weather to ride in. Enjoyable, where you're just we've had days where it's 10 degrees, 8 degrees. We had a day where we woke up and it was literally -2, and I'm this is awful. So I've gotten real desperate, and that's where I found myself. I'm I just need to get outside mentally one time just to kind of break up my week. And honestly, it felt great. I was riding intentionally slower, but to me, it actually it just kind of helped reset, my mentality and just be you know what, that was, even though it was a really cold ride, the roads were wet, I still was man, you know what, this beats a trainer every single time. So yeah. What's yours?
Man, I don't know. Zwift has made the temperature go up every.
I feel I used to ride in lower temperatures.
I went out once and it was 18.
Yeah.
And I was why did I do this? I'd say maybe 35 and dry.
Yeah.
If there's people, I'll go.
Yeah.
But I think part of it, and I should have asked you this, there's a time element. After 1 hour, no matter what I put on my feet are freezing. So if there's a cafe ride, we can stretch it longer because I can go in and warm up.
Yep.
But I struggle, if I'm going to do a 2 to 3 hour outdoor ride, I'm man, I need 35 to 40. Because anything at 35 or under, it's after an hour, my toes just can't handle it.
Yeah.
So now to go back to answer your question about week 3, that being said, that we've been stuck inside for 3 weeks, training's going okay. So I'm really excited about training right now because the plan that Derek has me on, I'm definitely doing more volume earlier than I've ever done. And not in a sense of oh, you're doing way too much. Just I've noticed my, even my zone 2 or my recovery rides, instead of being 45 to 60 minutes, now they're 60 to 90.
Yep.
And so I'm just hitting that, even that little extra half hour on the trainer, I'm noticing over time is really adding, I feel like it's adding fitness. I'm like, I feel myself getting stronger. And once you start regularly doing 90-minute trainer rides, suddenly the 60-minute rides are feel like nothing.
Yes.
Like I used to hit this mental block at minute 30 on Zwift. Minute 30 to 50 was like the longest span of time. Now I'm like, this isn't so bad.
Yeah.
The thing I want to get into though, because I have this theory with indoor training, and I've tried to pick your brain on this, but so there's this erg mode.
Yep.
So, okay, I've been riding a lot more in erg mode. And for those that don't know, erg mode, you just set your power at whatever. So like zone 2, if I'm going, let's say Derek's got me at 170 watts, I put that in and it just holds 170. Now, here's what I've noticed about Zwift though. When I run Zwift and I run the power, I run them through my power meter, which is I have the Asioma pedal.
Mm-hmm. Same ones I do.
Yeah, I have the power meter pedals. So my pedal is the power meter, and that tracks my cadence and obviously my power output. So when I log into Zwift, and when you log into Zwift, so you have the screen where you sync up your power meter.
Yep.
And then right next to that, it syncs up the resistance.
Yep.
So if it's your trainer, it says, I don't know, TACX or Wahoo or whatever. Yep. And then right next to that in the screen, it says resistance, and it's the same thing. Is your trainer a direct drive trainer? Okay.
Yep.
So I have the lower kind of entry level power trainer. So it's I leave a wheel on, I have a separate training wheel that I throw on the bike.
Correct.
And it's pretty much the same in the sense of you take a wheel off, I take one off, and I throw one on.
Yep.
And so my cadence is measured through the power meter. Mm-hmm. So when I get on Zwift and I put in Asioma, and then it registers, okay, that's the power, and then that registers the cadence, the next screen, it stays empty, the resistance, until I click out of Asioma, and I have to then load in the kicker, the Wahoo kicker.
Yep.
Then it populates the resistance. Then I have to go back and switch it to Asioma. I know that makes no sense. I'll put a video in, but here's what I've noticed about the two. So I like training through the Asiomas because those are the pedals that I'm riding outside.
Yep.
So I feel like the power data that I'm getting is more similar to what I'd be getting outside.
Yep.
Because it's the same power meter. When I ride on Zwift though, you can get on their, or when I ride on the Wahoo, you can get on their website and they always say this is plus or minus 3 to 5% accuracy. And that doesn't really bother me. The thing that I've noticed though, when I do any workout with the trainer, it locks you in. So if I hit, let's say 200 watts and I'm in some type of high zone 2, low zone 3, it is going to it holds you there. And as soon as you start slowing down, it's going to eventually grind out your pedals.
Yep.
The pedal power meter, it doesn't it's almost like a little bit of a pendulum.
Yeah, it doesn't keep you as steady as your trainer.
It doesn't hold it.
Yeah.
But I think that's more of a realistic ride experience.
100%.
Because if I go outside and if I'm doing intervals, even if I'm on average power, your power is going to be fluctuating a lot. When do you ever hold a perfect 200 watts or whatever interval you're doing? You might get some, aerobic where it's above your threshold stuff and you're going up a 4-minute effort.
Yeah.
So say you're at 280 watts, 290, you're not going to, very rarely will you ever hold that the whole time. It's going to be going everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this, I'm really struggling right now to figure out what mode I want to use because I'm doing way more zone 2 and I'm doing way more erg mode in general, which is not as fun. Yeah. Because it's you're just spinning.
So let me ask you this. One is let me ask you this. question, because it is really fascinating, because even though I have the same pedals, I don't use the same bike on the trainer. So therefore I'm just using my TacX, which is great, but it holds that power super consistent. So whenever I'm in a custom workout, which is most of the time, I'm holding power exactly the power that I want to, where it's like that trainer's got me locked in to that specific power, 155 or 200 or whatever that is. And it's like, it's great. It's super helpful, but you're right. It does not feel at all like when you're riding outside. There's a big difference because you do have that fluctuation. So my question for you is like, have you, when you've ridden where you've looked at your power afterwards, let's say you've done a zone 2 ride and one of them you've used your pedals to measure, and then the other one you've used just the trainer.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Which one is more consistent? And which one at the end of the ride do you look at and you'd be like, okay, if you were supposed to hold 180 watts for, let's say you had 2 zone 2 rides, they're both 180 watts, right? If you kept them the same, but just for the sake of it, it's like if you use one with your pedals versus one with just your trainer holding power, which one of those would be more steady for you? And which one did you enjoy more?
Okay.
Yeah, from that perspective.
So it partly depends on the power level that you're doing. So if I'm doing sprints, like let's say 20/40s or 30/30s at like 375, the trainer, I almost can't even get the trainer up to 375. Now the pedals, I can get over that and I can hit 450, and then it's going to take a little bit off and bring it down to average it.
Yep.
So it depends on the power level and the duration of the interval, because it's an averager. So it's like if you're doing a 4-minute effort, if I'm doing 180 or 200 watts for 4 minutes, it's going to be at the end, it's going to say on Zwift, whether I did the trainer, which has the same resistance as what you're saying with the TacX, or if I do the pedals, that's going to be the same. The feeling is very different. So from an enjoyable standpoint, I would say the pedals feel more enjoyable because
it feels more like you're riding outside.
It feels more like I'm riding outside, but I also feel like, and I don't know if it's because I don't have a direct drive trainer and maybe my power is like harder, but I feel when I'm in straight erg mode through the trainer, I feel like it's harder. Like even
cadence wise?
Everything wise. So like I'll track my heart rate and my heart rate will go above my kind of zone 2 heart rate much quicker. So like I think my zone 2 heart rate is, I try to keep it about right around under 130. So like 120 to 130. And when I do the erg mode in the trainer, I'm 135, 140 out of the gate. And
I'm maybe because you're working harder, but you're not like as used to that, where it's like in a way to where if you're saying this, where it's like whenever you're doing just the trainer in terms of your power, it's like your higher heart rate is because you're working harder. You're not as comfortable with that versus using your pedals.
So you're thinking like a relaxed thing, like I'm not as relaxed. Is that what you're saying?
I have no idea. I'd be curious to hear, even what our coach says about that. But yeah, what does Coach Derek think of you using the trainer versus the pedals?
I think he wants me more on the trainer, but
why?
I think because it's just so consistent. So a zone 2 is just here straight 180 watts and hold that for 2 hours. But even that, I'm like, zone 2 is when you're doing erg mode versus just kind of roaming around Zwift, even that I've noticed is more challenging than I originally thought. Where I used to think, oh my gosh, zone 2, Tade is doing it for 4 or 5 hours and just... And I'm like, that sounds like, that number sounds crazy hard, but like zone 2 in my mind is supposed to be super obtainable. But on the trainer, even after 90 minutes at 180 watts in erg mode, I'm like, I'm starting to, I'm getting tired. Like I can just infinitely hold this for another multiple hours. Like, okay, I gotta get more food in me and stay on top of it. So I don't know. I feel like,
do you feel like it's throwing off your training, trying to figure that out?
No, I don't feel like it, because I've kind of used to that. I've been doing that now since I got the pedals. Like when I first got the pedals, I was like, oh, I can just do it through the power meter pedals. And it's just got more, it just kind of fluctuate when you're actually doing the interval. So if I'm doing like 230 on the trainer, it's just 230. If I'm doing 230 with the pedals, I might pedal real hard in the beginning and it might swing up and hit 250 watts. And then it'll bring the resistance down a little bit to average it. So I might dip down to 225 or 230 and then bring it back up to 240 or whatever number I said in the beginning. So it kind of like,
it fluctuates.
It fluctuates, which to me feels better.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like it. Derek wants me to try the trainer more, but he says he sees merit. Last I talked to him, he's probably changed his mind. I don't know. But last time I talked to him, he said he sees merit in doing because it more is realistic to outside.
Yeah.
And my thing too is once I get outside and I'm doing all my workouts outside, if I'm training and doing certain wattage on the trainer and that power meter is drastically off from the pedals, in my mind, it makes more sense to go off the pedals because that's the same power meter that I'm going to be doing outside.
Yeah. I wish that I had erg mode in the outside at times on rides because there's some times where I'm like, it's all over the place.
Yes.
And I wish it was more consistent, like erg mode where I'm like, just keep me at 200 and, and I'll get through this ride. You know?
It's hard. And it's definitely hard when you go on group rides and you get super
there's so
excited
much surges
and like I'm feeling good or
somebody starts bursting out and
up
you're
the
like,
hill and
all right, here we go.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm excited for this year with training is just trying to be more disciplined. Like when we rode with Derek a few months ago, he was super disciplined. Like every climb we did, he was last one up the hill.
Yeah.
And he was by far the strongest guy in our group, like could dominate anybody. And he's just chilling. And then when we got 2.5 hours in, everybody's starting to get a little tired. He's just riding off the front because he's like, no, I've just stayed in the same zone all day.
Yeah.
The other thing I've kind of been struggling with is, so I've been attempting to get up earlier and ride. Now, hang on. I'm not going to make an excuse. This week I've been sick, so I'm coming off a stomach bug.
Yeah.
Now,
fair.
Last week I was super proud. I made it 7 days straight.
Yeah.
And
it's pretty good.
No. For me, that's like, that's a grand slam.
Well, just everybody knows for context. So I'm an early bird, right? I get up super early. I'm always riding early. And I've had a pretty enjoyable experience with Greg because he'll text me the night before and be like, hey, are you riding in the morning? And it's like, yeah, of course. It's like, what time? Probably 5:30, usually like 5:30. So,
I'm not going to be on then. I'll be on at like 6.
Yeah. So 6 o'clock comes around, and this has happened many of times so far in our only 3 weeks of training where it's like 6 o'clock's coming around. I'm looking on Zwift. I'm like, he's not up. And, at 6:30, 7 o'clock, I'm like, yeah, Greg slept in the day. Or
I'll be at work like, I didn't have it today. I'll get on after work.
So 7 days is good. So yeah, how do you feel about mornings? What are your how does the wife feel? How does how does that play into the dynamics of your day?
The first 2 or 3 days I would get anxiety. I did not sleep. I stressed like, oh my gosh, I have to get up in 6 hours. Now it's 5 hours. Like I couldn't sleep. After 3 days, I started to actually adjust, and it was good for the family. I'm not coming home from work and then going to the basement for an hour and a half and being away, then coming up and eating dinner. I'm done, and then we all go to so I work at a school, and the school I work at we're on the same campus as my kids. So we all go to the same place. And so it's great that I get up, I work out, we all go to school, I drop them off, and then we come home and it's not hanging over me where, oh man, I got to eat dinner. I got to eat dinner at 5 and get my food digested. Yep. The only part I haven't figured out yet is fueling. I had my first ever indoor bonk, which I've never had that happen. I've bonked outside. Yeah. But I woke up the other day and I did a workout and I popped a gel and I had just regular electrolytes, and I got done with it wasn't even it was just a tempo ride, and I got off and my legs were shaking. And I was like, I think I'm just sore because I lifted 2 days ago. I did some squats. So I'm like, that's it. And I go to get in the car, and I couldn't get in the car. And I'm driving to work, and my son's looking at me like, Dad, what is wrong with you? Why are you?
What's wrong with you,
And
Dad?
finally, I got into the building, and I got some food. And as soon as I started eating, I was like, oh, I bonked, and I didn't even realize it. So how do you do that? Do you wake up and eat breakfast at 4:30 in the morning?
I'm excited to eat super early. I've always been that way though, where it's it's weird for me because.
What do you eat then?
I'll usually do a lot of oatmeal.
Okay.
Or some sort of like yogurt granola mix. Like, cause to me, I need something light enough to where I'm not like nothing heavy.
Right.
But then it's like, but I just like, I'm the type of person where I wake up and I'm like, I'm hungry. I'm always hungry.
How much time
it's
elapses
great.
between waking up and actually getting on the bike for you? For me, I try to sleep till the last possible minute.
I give myself a little bit of a window. So I kind of like to roll out at like, I'll get up the alarm goes off at 4. I'm usually, everybody's cringing. 4 o'clock's great. Me and Mark Wahlberg, right? Me and Marky Mark are up. Nobody else on the planet's up at that time, but the crazy ones. But we are up, and it's like, and I'll give myself like a half hour to just like make some coffee, kind of like stretch, get ready. I'll take some fuel, and it's like, I'm usually a good 30, maybe sometimes even 40 minutes before I'll get on the bike sometimes. And sometimes even if I'm waking up at 4, sometimes it goes into where I'm just casually kind of getting into the trainer where it's like 5, something like that.
What time will you go to bed then if you're waking up at 4? Like how much sleep do you try to get every night?
Usually it's like 10:30. It just depends.
So 6 hours?
Yeah, but I've been operating on that way for years.
Okay.
And it feels fine. Like
But you've got a baby at home.
I got an 8-month.
Yeah.
Yeah, sleep hasn't been great. If you're asking about it's a sleep schedule. Man. Yeah.
I can't, like when I'm like, oh man, I'm doing so great at getting up at 5:30, and you're like, and you've already been up an hour and a half. You've already done a full you potentially could have already done a full 90-minute ride.
I could have, yeah. Not most mornings, but I don't wake up and get on the trainer like immediately.
This is why I'm excited for the summer, because I'm like, I know you will be up to ride with me. This is what I was saying last week about being excited to train with you, because I'm like, if there's one guy that's going to get me up,
it'll be me.
Hopefully it'll be you, because so far it hasn't worked. But what about you? What is training looking like for you right now?
Yeah, it's been good. I would say I agree with you on the volume. One of the things that's interesting for me is just that since my background has been over the last almost 2 years has been the tri, I'm always a third of what I'm doing is just biking. So I'm never been this really high volume, just purely cycling miles. And so for me, that volume of getting up to like, in that like 9-10 hours of just purely riding, and on top of that lifting too, where it's like, that's been interesting for me because I'm not used to that much volume, but I enjoy it. Like so far it's been great. Like a lot of, zone 2 easier, do some high intensity rides too. But I would just say from the volume, that was one thing I noticed the other day where I'm like, I'm enjoying this. It's good. I also feel really good not having to worry about figuring out the swim part of it in the morning with the gym. That was always a hassle. And so I enjoy the fact that I can just literally once I get my cycling done, I'm like, man, I'm good for the day. But I've enjoyed the volume so far. I felt like it's been more than I thought. And then also like total hours wise, I'm like somewhere in that 9 to 10-ish.
That's about where I'm at, yeah.
And so it's like, I feel good. It doesn't feel crazy high compared to what I was doing historically, but just from a pure cycling perspective, much, much higher. So I think my legs are just adapting to that, given that I was spent last half of the year just running. It's like kind of getting my legs like, hey, you're getting into the cycling shape and not just purely running. So
do you find the bike right now, because of kind of what I said before with the weather and the weather we've had around here?
Yeah.
So in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think if you're doing a tri, your training's always kind of broken up. So It's like, okay, today I'm running, and you can
try and do 3 days of bike, 3 days of swim, 3 days of running.
So you can definitely get outside and run in the weather we've had. Substantially easier
100%
than riding a bike outside in the weather.
Yeah, you can go run in 20 degrees and not feel that bad.
And wear shorts and be okay. Now, because you're only biking and you've been inside, has that been mentally more challenging versus before? It's like, okay, I'm going to hit the swim, I'm going to go ride, I'm going to run tomorrow. It's like, you're just, like you said, you're doing 2/3 more on the trainer now than what you'd be doing last year at this time. Does that psychologically kind of suck right now?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the things that's different about it too is like, I mean, partly it's created a little bit more of that, like, I'm more desperate to get outside than I ever was with, where historically it's like even in the winter of last year where I'm like, if I needed to get outside, I'd go run. And I'm like, and it was great because then I'm running outside for an hour and I'm getting that, itch scratched of being like, hey, I'm not just indoors the whole time. But I would say that for me, one of the interesting things from my like week 3 training has been that, because when I'm, we were talking about this earlier, like you got out and I was talking with our coach about this, which is interesting, where it was like a zone 2 ride, right? It was scheduled to where it was just a pure zone 2 ride. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Weather's okay enough, but I'm so desperate to get outside that I just was like, I'm going to do this outdoors. Now, I wanted to do it on a super flat section because I know when you're doing zone 2 outdoors, it's so much easier to keep your consistency in that zone 2 power when it's flat. Obviously, if you add a lot of hills in there, you're not staying in zone 2 unless you're really used to like training where you can keep that.
Yeah.
But for me, someone who's like coming with this recreational background, it's like, it's really hard to stay consistent in a zone 2, even with any sort of like rolling hills, anything like that. So one of the things that was interesting about like my training was, I was thinking about this where I'm like, I was talking with Derek about this afterwards, where our coach was just like, hey, I did a zone 2 ride, like mentally super great, where I'm like, hey, I got outside. It felt like it was cold, but it was great, and I tried as much as possible. Like my total average power was like 175. The problem is I went into zone 3 heart rate.
Too much,
and zone 3 power, because even when I'm not I wasn't trying to I ended up climbing like almost 2,000 feet, where I'm like 2,000 feet of elevation gain. I'm like, that's not a lot, but over the course of like 2 hours, I'm like, it made my zone 2 really not a zone 2 ride. And when I was thinking about this afterwards, where I'm like, the difference of doing a zone 2 inside, where you can keep that consistency the whole time, you can keep your heart rate at a steady, like, especially with erg mode, right? Where you're like, hey, I can keep my heart rate at this, beats per minute for, the next whatever hour or 90 minutes. It's like, yeah, not as difficult. But then when you're riding outside, your body's reacting to these hills, it's reacting to all these things. And so I think one of the things is I was reminded of this is just to keep your easy days easy and your hard days hard, right? And to me, my easy day, quote unquote, what would have been a zone 2, actually I spent more time in the zone 3 power and also heart rate. That, like, when I was talking with coach afterwards, he's like, it's not bad to do this every once in a while, but you got to be careful, right? Because especially when you, like most of us, where it's like, if you're struggling with the winter weather right now, it's really tempting to be like, I'm just need to get outside. And the problem is if you're training in that zone where you're doing a lot more fluctuation, you're really not getting the whole benefit of doing the zone 2.
Did he say, when you say once in a while, did he give an idea of, like, is that once a week? Is that once every month? Is that every 2 weeks? Like, what's once in a while? Because
I feel like that's maybe like once a month.
Okay.
If I had to guess, because to me, if I think about it, and this is where it's like, this is part of the challenge with even group rides, where it's like, and you have had experiences this, where it's like, it'll be interesting as we train further, because group rides, as you know, people would say cafe ride, and everybody is zone 4. Zone 3.
It's never
a tempo ride.
Yeah.
It's never a zone 2 or a chill ride. Like, I've been on maybe one of all the cafe rides I've done where you're not, at some point somebody's just popping off and you're like, all right. So I think the problem though is, like, if you look at it over the course, it's like, you might actually do a really hard ride on a group ride or be out with friends, have a blast, but then the problem is that throws your next 3 to 4 days off. And if your coach is spending time putting a lot of energy into, like, hey, if you're doing a zone 2 ride on Saturday, great, then you'll be ready for this ride on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And it's like, but then if you've had a really hard day instead of that zone 2 that you were scheduled for, the problem becomes is then it throws off your training the whole next week, where your body's like, I'm actually a lot more tired, a lot more fatigued than I used to be. Or a lot more fatigue going into this next session. So therefore, like, you have to make a lot of adjustments. So I think in terms of the big scope, it's like, it's fine. There's obviously, it's like, you need to get outside and it's a part of riding. But I think from a training perspective, I'm trying to figure out, like, if I ride outside, I think keeping it super flat for like a zone 2, if I'm supposed to stay in a specific zone, my goal is to try and be as flat as possible.
I mean, I feel like the advantage you have on the north side of the Ohio River is the Little Miami Trail.
Yeah, it's nice.
So for those listening that don't live in the Cincinnati area, we have, I think it's the old Rails to Trails. It's basically this old rail line that's been converted to a bike path, and it stretches from Cincinnati to Columbus, which is like 125 miles of just bike path. It's amazing. Like, I've taken it twice up to Columbus, and it's awesome. But it's pretty much flat the whole way, whereas south of the Ohio River, it's way more rolling hill. Like on my side, it's way more rolling hills and valleys and climbs. Like even from my house, anywhere I go to get home, I'm climbing. Yeah. Like there's no way to get back to my house without going up a considerable 3 to 6 minute effort hill.
Yeah. And I would say the last thing with my training is just that idea of like, so anybody who's got a newborn, like we have an 8-month-year-old through foster care, and it's like, she's the most amazing thing in the world. The problem is like her sleep is never that consistent. She's been sick this week, and I'm like, we're intermittently up a couple of times a night, between my wife and I, and I'm like, I'll wake up in the morning and be like, this is awful, and she's been sick, like Harmony's, she's been sick. So it's like one of those things to where you're like, I get it, but then she's not considering my training.
I was going to say my Zwift.
It's like when I wake up though, I'm more tired. I'm like, it's just it's part of life, where I wake up and I'm like, it is what it is. And I can't I still got to get the training in. I feel fine, but it's more of those like, I'm not getting as much consistent sleep over the last 8 months that I would have before, just because of, having a.
I was going to say, infant. I saw today my Zwift companion popped up, and it was you, and like substantially later in the day than 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, oh man,
I didn't sleep.
What is happening? And I was like, is he adopting my habits here? I'll just do it later.
Never going to that evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, I'm trying to think, is there anything else we want to cover from training right now that you can think of?
Yeah, I think the only thing is just one that I did a quick video on this the other day is like resting heart rate. So I think that's important just and you guys can check it out. It's we have it up on our Instagram and TikTok, and even YouTube Shorts. But the idea of monitoring your sleep and your resting heart rate. So the first thing when you wake up for the first like 5 to 10 minutes, it's really important. Historically, I've never done this. So I know there's things like Whoop and other, auras and things like that. But even through your Garmin, like I'm trying to keep mine by my bedpost, and like first thing I'll do is I'll strap on my watch, turn it on, and just I'll look at my heart rate to see where it is, because our coach has mentioned, he's like, one of the things that's really important with your resting heart rate is to measure how much fatigue you actually are carrying into that day. So for example, like on average, most people are in that 60 to 100 beats per minute, where that's a typical resting heart rate for a majority of people. The thing is like when you're looking at it, like, so if you wake up and yours is in the 50s, right? You're like, great, I feel pretty good. Like, obviously you're not basing it solely just on your exact heart rate. But in general, like if I woke up and my resting heart rate was like 80, I'd be like, ooh,
this is substantially higher than normal.
Significantly higher than my normal, like maybe high 50s, maybe low 60s. So it's a way to just measure, kind of monitoring your sleep. And I think in terms of training, that's going to be really important, because to me, if I'm consistent with it, I can measure and look back, and Garmin has the data for you. But the problem is I'm not measuring it the first thing when I wake up, because your heart rate will fluctuate very quickly. So 30 minutes in, my heart rate is much higher than it is when I just wake up.
Can you wear that? I mean, I know you can. Does the battery allow you to wear it? Do you have to charge it overnight, or do you wear it overnight so you can get that through the night sleep and just kind of have that data?
You can, but the problem is I will never sleep with a watch. It's just wild. Even though this thing's super comfortable, I would never sleep with anything on my wrist at night, because I'd hit my it would just be awful. But to me, it's kind of that annoying where I have to turn it on every morning and do it. But I am, for the sake of data, curious about this, because I'm like, hey, if I'm, I should be in this specific range, that's my normal. And then if all of a sudden I start seeing this, like, oh, I'm starting to peak a lot higher, when I'm like, ooh, maybe that's a good indication for me and our coach to be able to say, you actually might be more fatigued than you think, so let's adjust some of your training accordingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You should look into the Aura Ring.
I know.
Because they also track a temperature.
I know. That'd be nice.
Because they were using them, I think they were using them really early on as pre-COVID indicators. Because the fever was kind of that early indicator of if you have COVID or not, back, 5 years ago. And so people started using Aura Rings to track.
Oh, I didn't know.
Because it wasn't every time you take your temperature, it's like, okay, I took it at this time, but you have a live stream of what your body temperature.
Yeah. Ooh.
But I've heard the charge lasts like 7 days. Oh, that's super curious to me. It's like amazing. To have a wearable that you don't have to take off.
I know. That would be nice. It feels like eventually I'd get something like that.
See, I don't have one because even Jess has been like, would you ever want an Apple Watch? And because I have my Wahoo, and I have my heart rate strap. That's everything I need on that. I'm like, I can't justify
another thing
that does the same. Like I get all my text messages on there. I only need a fitness tracker when I'm doing an activity. Yeah. In my mind, at least. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. But otherwise I'm excited.
For sure. So I definitely want to hear from the audience on a lot of stuff we talked about. I want to hear questions and comments in YouTube on erg mode, what your experience has been. Do you do erg mode? Do you just kind of free roam around Zwift or Ruby, or even Training Peaks has a virtual training platform now? What is the winter like for you where you live? Are you stuck indoors? Are you able to get outside right now? I want to talk about resting heart rate. Any comments on that? And just fueling in the morning in general. If you are an early morning person, how do you fuel? How are you like me, where you wake up to the last possible minute to ride? Or are you more like Josh, where you're waking up substantially earlier for no reason to eat some oatmeal? So leave us some comments there. We definitely want to know what your habits and patterns are for training indoors in the winter. All right, so I want to segue off of that. To races, because ultimately the whole purpose of this channel is us being recreational and trying to get to some type of racing. I don't think we've never made a claim to go pro.
I'm going pro.
I'm not
this year for sure.
Well, you're waking up early enough. So, but the idea is, racing is a very large blanket or large umbrella of what that falls under. So I do want to talk real quick about the types of races and who they're for. So, and because I want to discuss this a little bit. In cycling, you've got kind of the three main races. So you've got time trials, which is kind of almost like what you'd picture if you're doing a triathlon. You're on a time trial bike, and it's just you versus the clock. You've got crit races, which terrify me, and I'll talk about in a minute. And then you've got road races. So the question I want to get into is, who are these races for? Who signs up for each one? So like when I think of a time trial, the race I'm thinking of is more similar to like when I was a runner and you're in a smaller race and you're just kind of out and it's just you versus the clock. So a time trial, because that's really what it is. You're not drafting, you're not, you're staggering your start, and it's just you holding an FTP or whatever for however much time you can. And to me, a time trial, that's where I would think FTP really matters the most, of just having that very calculated, what can I hold for 30 minutes at a max effort, or 40 or however long. I would guess most time trials are probably around 20 to 40 minutes.
Somewhere in that range, sometimes even less.
So there's that. Then there are crits, which in my mind, and I think we're probably going to disagree on this, I think of a crit and I think of someone who's just got that kind of raw horsepower at the end, like sprinter, big numbers. Crits don't really interest me a ton because, one, I'm terrified of crashing, and that's
it's fair.
I appreciate how crits are always on a closed course. I do like that. Like, I think a lot of people feel nervous for being out on the road. And so a crit is it's a closed course, which I do like. You can't get lost.
It'd be very hard to get lost.
You can't get lost. But I feel like the crit guys and gals are the ones that just have that.
So you think of them as more sprinters?
Yeah, because I mean,
interesting. I disagree. Okay.
I think there are skills to crit racing and being in the pack and recognizing the moves. But what I don't like about crit racing is the most fit, strongest rider doesn't always win.
Tactically, there's a lot of moves.
But I also think that there's a part of the one with just like, I don't envision myself ever having a shot at winning a crit because my max power is like 850 watts. Like it's not. And then when you look at even mediocre guys who are not pro, they're able to put out at least 1,000 to 1,100 watts. And I'm like, I mean, I'm sure I can raise mine some, but I don't think I'm ever going to be winning a straight up sprint horsepower person. So I think of crits as like a sprinter or like not a sprinter, but like you've got that
Yeah.
really high,
Jasper
20 to
Philipson.
30 second, just, yes,
Interesting.
power output. What interests me is the road races.
Yeah.
So road races, typically a little bit longer in distance.
Yeah. More endurance based.
More endurance based, and that's kind of coming from a cross-country background and that
Yeah.
mid-distance background. That seems more enticing to me. I hated track in high school, so why would I want to go do a crit and just ride around in circles? Like, that doesn't sound as fun to me.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I agree with you on the time trials because it is really, I think who those are for. I agree with you where it is really you versus yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's just that individual, there's no team dynamics in the aspect of like, if it's just racing in terms of like, okay, taking out the pro level of it, right? So it's like, obviously there's dynamics of the pros where they're like, helps you get your, points for your, teams, but it's like from a pure everything else where it's like the time trial aspect is just you versus yourself, right? And I think that's like you versus the clock. I think for people who love that and enjoy that element, that's perfect. For TTs, that's exactly what you should be doing because you don't have to worry about anybody else. It's just focused on yourself. Mm. I think for road races, I agree with you where it's like the idea of like you have a much bigger endurance base probably than maybe not other riders, but a lot of other, guys and gals where it's like you enjoy the longer elements of the race and you're not surging right away, but you're also responding to surges in the race. But inevitably, it is about more of like who has the better overall endurance fitness that can help win, with the caveat of course, it's still going to come down to like, are you on are you in a group pack? Are you in the front pack?
Tactics
and so the tactics still play a heavy role into it. I think the thing with road races to me is also like, obviously there's going to be some hills in most road races. So it's like, if you're naturally a better climber or you enjoy that, you might gravitate more towards like a road race than you would maybe a crit because crits are obviously typically flat, not all the time, but it's like typically they're more flat than road races. So I think for me though, with crits, I feel like where I disagree where it's like, I don't think of them so much as like sprinters. Sure, there's of course sprinters in there that can hold that, like have that like crazy high power and hold it for a little bit at the end. But I do think that like for me, it's so much more about people that enjoy, and this is where I'm coming from, not having the experience with this, but to me, it's more about having this short term, like you enjoy the dynamics of being like, hey, I've got this timed, it's much shorter than a road race, but I've got this time where I want to try and play as much tactics as I can to keep on the wheel of the person that I feel like is going to give me the best opportunity to win this race or get close enough to where I want to go. And I think to me, it's like, there's an element of it to where it's like, it's so interesting from a cornering, you have to be good at cornering, you have to be good at responding to surges, that it's like, you go to this, to me, that's like, you're responding to things, like you're trying to be this overall really high energy the whole time where you're holding as much power as you possibly can without burning out, and it's like, to me, that's terribly interesting because it's like, the crit race might only be an hour or 40 minutes or whatever, but it's like for the guys and gals that can like do a really good job at holding, like if they pick out a couple of people before the race and if they know them, it's even helpful where they're like, I think this guy or gal is the one I want to like hold their wheel to. If they make sure that like if their team tactic play involved in that, where it's like they can hold that wheel and they can get to where their team can help them get to that point where they're giving them the best opportunity to win the race, I think that's fascinating. Obviously, there's team dynamics that play in road races, but in the crit race, I feel like it's like the sprinting at the end is really great, but I think you can also win those races a lot. Like you don't, at least for me, I could be wrong. I'd love to hear what you guys think on this, but like to me, the crits, especially in the like regional, local stuff, it's more about the guys and gals that can stay in that front pack. And it's like at the very end, you might be down to like, you might finish in a bunch pack, but most of the time you're not dealing with, it's not like you see in the pros where you've got 20, 30 people up there. You're dealing with a lot less people.
So similar to the road race then, when what you're saying is the endurance, but who can just outlast the others? Who can not get dropped? Because once you get dropped from a crit, if you like, a lot of them, they pull you out of the crit. Like if it gets just to a point where you're going to
so
get
far
lapped or
behind.
you're kind of in the way, they'll pull you off the course.
Yeah.
Like I've seen that happen before in some races. So you're saying it's like a gritting it out and who can survive
I think so.
at this higher intensity and like.
I think it's just so much more in like to me it's like it's so much more of that like you're just on high alert the whole time versus maybe a road race where you're maybe not on high alert where you don't have to go off to this really fast start. Now you might, but in terms of like a road race where it's like if you've got 4 hours to get through this big race, it's like you're gonna find yourself pretty comfortable the most time trying to push yourself into that like zone 3, where you're tempoing, you're trying not to like burn too many matches too quickly. But in like a crit, it's like you're gonna burn through your matches. You got to be real strategic about it in terms of because you've only got a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's like when do you start burning those matches, and when is a good point to where you're like, I'm really struggling and I need to like do whatever it takes to hang on this wheel. I just think the dynamics of it are so much more of this like explosiveness where you're just like keep that high intensity the whole time versus a road race, which to me would be a little bit more relaxed, probably be more enjoyable. But I think in terms of like,
You make it sound like
Yeah.
you're just out there on a leisure ride. I'm just going to go out cruising around these road races. Like,
It's not, I think I'm framing it probably not the best, but I think that like, cause I'm excited about doing road races with you, but I think that like, to me, what's interesting about the crit is just that like, it's just this explosiveness that I'm like, I don't know, man, that would be, when I've seen you do it, and when I've seen Derek and other friends do it, I'm like, there's just something different about that to where you're just seeing the same, like it's that same loop and you can see, man, they're really struggling, or man, they're like doing awesome.
When you say you've seen me do it, I have done one crit.
Yeah.
I got pulled out after 15 minutes
Yep.
because there was a 180-degree turn and it started raining and bodies were going down all around me.
Yeah.
And so for me, it wasn't worth crashing.
Yeah.
So I backed off. And I also didn't realize that the way they seated the start was when you signed up. And I was the last one to sign up. So I was in the very back and they said go, and it was a full sprint out of the gate. And I was like, what is this? But I will say, when you mentioned a high power, it's not that your average is consistently high, but you've got the ability that it fluctuates. Because you go into a corner and you stop pedaling, depending on the sharpness of the turn. And so your heart rate drops, but then you come out and you're full sprinting. Mm-hmm. It's like you're doing 30-30 workouts all the time. And so your power is extremely high because it's fluctuated.
Yeah.
If it's,
it's like those HIIT workouts.
Yes.
If you enjoy those.
It's like if you like those, then go do a crit.
Crits are for you.
Crits are for you.
Yeah. And so far I like those. So we'll see. I mean, I might get into it and be like, I'm getting absolutely dusted and this is awful.
Get me out of here.
Get me out of here. Jesus, take the wheel. Okay. Well, I think it's going to be fun because we're doing doing all three.
Yeah.
And I think
we got to dabble in all of them. We got to figure out what we really like.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What is your A race this year?
So for me, it's a race called the Cherahalla Challenge. Mm-hmm. I'm racing it. I think it's one of those kind of more fondo / like it's not fully like you don't need a U.S. racing license to do it. You can just sign up and do it. But I'm going to go as hard as I can. Yeah. So it's 113 miles and it's got 10,000 feet of climbing.
Woof.
Yeah. It's the first 40 miles is awesome. It's this
you're just chilling, right? Zone 1.
Yeah. But like they have a motorcade and it's not a neutral
awesome.
start, but you're with everybody. And then as soon as the first climb hit, it just breaks apart. And so you go through, it's in Tellico Plains, Tennessee. I did it last year. It was awesome. There's a lot of improvements that I already recognize I want to make this year, mostly with my descending.
Yep.
At the very top, I think we were like 6,000 feet up. It was super windy. Oof. So for the first 30 minutes descending, I felt sketchy. Yeah. So I think there's definite room for improvement there, just descending and handling. And I think with the training I'm doing, I think I'll be more fit because the last 2 miles of the climb, I mean, it's like a 20-mile climb. Yeah. Like,
I'll do it with you. And
you're climbing for
I'm
like
nervous.
an hour and a half. You're just climbing. And like, you see people in front of you and you're like, oh, I'm gaining. They're only 100 yards away. And they just don't, like, they just stay 100 yards away. You're like, this sucks. Like, they've been there for a half an hour. So that's what I'm focusing on.
Yeah.
I am going to do some of the core races, the cores. So that's
Yeah.
in Kentucky, we've got some local races. They stand for Kentucky Open Road Racing
super
Series.
exciting.
I did one last year.
Yep.
It was a blast. It was awesome roads. It was not heavily trafficked. And I think that's what freaks a lot of people out, that
Yep.
open road races, it's like, oh, there's cars and stuff.
Yeah.
But this race, it was run really well. There was a lot of road, like race workers that like
Yeah.
were stopping traffic.
Love it.
So
Yeah.
you could go through stop signs because they were stopping all cars, and you didn't have that feeling of, oh, I got to stop at this stoplight and wait. So the course was great. These old country roads, lots of rolling, lots of good climbs.
Yep.
So right now I'm definitely there's 4 of them. I'm for sure doing 2. Depending on how my training in late April shakes out, I might get to do 3. Shoot, I might get to do all 4. I don't know. I got to talk to Jess about it. But right now I'm for sure doing 2, probably 3, unless I do a big ride up to Columbus before Cherahalla to kind of get those big miles. Yeah,
Yep.
like a big weekend of like 120 up and 120 back the next day, just to get those big miles for Cherahalla.
Well, and you got to get a lot of climbing in too.
Yeah, that's going to be the hard part, is getting in the climbing, like prepping for that. I might just do the Alp on Zwift. Like, I might just start Everesting.
Every day.
Like every day.
Every day for a month. Sounds great.
I'm gonna try a time trial this year. I'm gonna try to borrow a TT bike and do a time trial up the Blue Streak Blast, I think it's called.
Yep.
They run
Blue
every
Streak.
Tuesday in the spring. I figure we'll just go up on a Tuesday night, and
You're going to fall in love with tri-bikes. And you'll probably find yourself in a pool and then running back again pretty soon.
My knees can't handle that crap. So nope. I can tell you right now, it's not gonna happen. I am curious about the tri-bike. I think that'll be fun. I definitely want to try to get on the bike substantially before.
Yeah, get a feel for it.
I don't want to just get a bike and hop in the race and be like, that'd be like getting new shoes and going and running. That's terrible.
Use mine.
Okay. Yep. And then I am going to do a crit. I'm going to do the Hyde Park Blast. I did it last year. I didn't leave having this itch scratched to like, I love crits now. But I do want to give it a fair shot, because when I did it, the 2 things I didn't bank on was that it was going to rain.
Yeah.
And people were just going down everywhere. And I didn't know how they seeded it. So my strategy this year is to sign up like now, just to be like the first one called up to the line.
I love it.
So yeah, that's what we should do after this episode, is sign up for that real quick. So then we'll be just the 1-2 seeds right there.
Let's go. I'm down.
So no, those are the ones I'm doing. So really excited for Cherahalla.
Yeah. That'll be a blast.
Really excited for the training to get to that. That's the first full weekend of June.
Yep.
So that'll be fun. It'll be really hot, but it surprisingly gets really cold
at the top
up there. Yeah. Like that's one of those races where you probably have to figure out your kit, because you're not just going like summer attire. Like you need a gilet and possibly sleeves.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, there's like a whole strategy into that. So we'll chat more about that.
Yep.
What about you? What are you doing?
So my big goal this year is to get into crit races.
Okay.
That's my A race is going to be the Hyde Park Blast.
Okay.
I think I'm going to do a couple of like crits leading up to that to give myself some experience, because honestly this year I'm kind of looking at this year as like more of an experience year.
Okay.
Get my feet wet for it. I do not expect to be in any way, shape, or form have this like, oh man, I'm finishing like really well in these races. I think more than anything, it's getting the experience, learning the dynamics of the races themselves. I think what I'm excited for is to try and be a student of it, to where I'm like, okay, I want to learn, where did I go wrong here? What was this to where I'm like, man, if I just held onto this wheel, could I kept myself in a better position for the next 30 minutes, you know, something like that. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to see it play out over the course of the year to kind of get the feel of it more than anything else. But looking at that from more experience, Hyde Park Blast, as we've seen it over the years, it's something very local here, but like end of June, I'm excited for that, because especially when we've seen it where like our buddy Derek and others that we know, like under the lights, man, there's something special about when you get these, Cat 1-2 riders out there. It's just so much fun. So it's always like piqued my interest in terms of like there's crit races that happen in the afternoon for, Cat 4-5 and Cat 3s and stuff. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to be looking forward to that. I've got to do a couple of time trials as well as some road races with you. Definitely excited about some of the ones that we have planned together on the books.
When you say, so Hyde Park Blast is your focus.
A race, yep.
How many, you said a couple crits to prep for that. So roughly how many crits are you doing to get ready for that, to get that experience going into that?
Probably minimum 2. Okay. Maybe 3, but minimum 2. I think our coach will want to have me do more. But sure. It honestly, it's more of just, I would love to do more. It's honestly more of that, like, you and I both in the same boat. It's like married, young kids, full-time job. Man, it's hard to even just get regular training in. So adding another race in where it's like in a different season of life, I'd be doing probably a lot more leading up to that. But for this year, I'm excited to just even get a couple in. And then just, I think, even working on different things like my bike handling and cornering and things like that, to where I'll be working with a coach on that as it gets a little bit closer. But excited to just understand the dynamics of it. And then I think, like, going into it as well, I'm like, I think for me, I'm looking at this year and just be like, this will be the most I've ever truly had like things lined up this early in the year to where I'm like, hey, I know exactly what I'm doing from January all the way through August. And I'm excited for that because it gives me a lot of clarity into like, oh man, I'm excited for this month and for this. And it's like, and some of the B races will be more of these other crits that will take place. But I would say, honestly, I'm really looking forward to the Kentucky Open Road Race with you, Cherahalla, and then we're doing Georgia as well. So I think those are going to be real fun together. Because to me, it's the element of like doing something with somebody else. And like, especially with you, is like, man, this is going to be super fun. You know, there'll be just a fun element that I won't have doing stuff by myself. But I'll still have a blast. But yeah, that's kind of that's my races and goals. The
longer races where you're traveling are not, at least for me, not fun solo. Yeah. The experience of going with someone and driving down and talking about the race and what's coming up and just talking all things. Yeah, and then debriefing it on the way back. Yep. That's so fun. So I'm looking for that. I forgot about the Georgia one.
Yep.
When is that?
Jackson, Georgia. That is March 22nd through 23rd.
Oh, dang. We got like a month and a half.
Yeah. Get ready.
Yeah, seriously. But that's like going to be, because that's a multi-race, multi-day
correct
thing. So it's like I got to go back and look. I'm botching this. And so for the race.
There's a crit. There's a road race.
The race director, I apologize if I'm botching this, but there's a crit, there's a road race, and there's a circuit race, which we don't know. I don't know what that is, so we didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's like a crit, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know.
Not enough. Not enough to be in the big three of what they are. All right. So
Q&A.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm excited. We actually had a comment not from someone we locally know. So sorry, Peter, it wasn't you who commented on the first episode. But no, someone actually commented. So
yes, love it.
Kentucky Open Road Racing commented, which is awesome because we're going to that race. So it said, excited about y'all's podcast. Looking forward to hearing both of y'all's training. One topic I think would be good to talk about is what it's like coming into bike racing at the entry level versus the competitive level. Example would be speeds and endurance to expect as a Cat 5, especially when they combine the Cat 4-5, as you get a lot of really strong and experienced cyclists in those categories. I do my best to talk to new folks about this sort of thing, as I never want someone to do their first race, get disappointed, and then give up on the sport.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Yeah, I would say for me, I think this is a great question because it really plays into the fact of, like, for me, a novice coming into the idea of rolling up and you've got a bunch of other category 4 and 5 guys that you might be thrown into the mix with, where you've got people like me who maybe it's their first crit race, or maybe they've done a few and they've got some experience. But for me, then you've got guys like Cat 4 where you've gained some more experience, you're a little bit stronger, and it's like, I think the element of like the expectations for me is, so far it's really healthy going into it, of being like, hey, you know what? To me, it's more about the experience of getting into this and not like getting immediately disappointed that I'm getting dropped, or immediately like frustrated that I'm like, man, the first 10 minutes was just, it sucked, because then all these guys just started taking off, and then all of a sudden I'm left in the dust, and I'm like, I think for me, I understand this question to where it's like, I love it because I think my expectations are the fact that I'm like, for me coming into as a novice, I really don't expect to do well. And I want to be very careful about not going in with these crazy high expectations because inevitably I will be disappointed because I won't do as well as I hope. And I think just getting that initial experience is going to be really good, but understanding that there's going to be guys that are obviously much stronger that are still grouped into the same. And you're like, hey, that's part of it, and if you want to get better, then you need to get stronger. So that's where I stand on it. I think it's good, but I think a lot of people, I could see that where they can get into it and be like, yeah, this sucked, man. I hate this, where you're just like, oh no, like it's really just, that's part of the learning curve. It's like, you're not going to do well for a while, or even for the first couple,
See, I look at it from a road race and a crit perspective.
Yeah.
So when I think Cat 5 with road race, I think the same themes. I think like lack of experience, maybe lack of fitness, right? Where in a road race, I think, okay, so the way that plays out is you don't really fully get race tactics. You got to figure those out, or maybe you're not super fit. Where that, in my mind, freaks me out with crits is when I think lack of experience, I think of lack of bike handling skills. So I envision way more crashes in Cat 5 crit races than a Cat 5 road race. I think of like a Cat 5 road race is like, okay, the competition, you're just not as good, but I think
it's more about your fitness versus the bike handling.
Yes, whereas
makes sense.
And that's kind of why crits freak me out, because in order to cat up, you have to start at 5 and work your way to cat however good you get. And so let's say, I can take an FTP test or I can put out amazing numbers, and some chart on the internet might say I'm a cat whatever guy, but I have to start at 5. Yeah. And even if I'm really fit, I'm not confident in like descending or cornering. Like I don't have those great skills. And it's like when you go skiing. I know I suck, but you don't know anybody else on that freaking mountain. So like every time we go skiing and I'm going down, I'm like, okay, there's a little kid. I don't know if they're going to hit me or not, or cause me to crash. So that's how I feel about crit races with Cat 5. You don't know what everyone else's ability is. So it's like, is this guy going to take me out?
That's very fair. That's very fair. And honestly, that's probably a concern of mine that I have, especially as someone who's, invested a lot of money into my bike recently, where I'm like, I would be pretty bummed crashing my tarmac. And I think for me, it's also like, I don't know that my wife is fully aware that these races tend to be, can involve more crashes than other races. And so
let's hope she doesn't listen to this podcast.
Yeah. I think there's an element of I don't want to crash within my first couple of crits. I'm sure I'll see some. I just hope to not be involved in any or cause them. Yeah. That would be a pretty big, I'd feel horrible if that happened, which is normal. It happens. It's not, not intentional, but like accidents where that would be a factor that I agree with you that I'm like, it would be tough to find yourself in. And you're like, ugh, don't love that, but that's part of it.
That's gonna bruise.
Yeah. All right. So we want to hear from you guys. So make sure, if you haven't done already, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below. We would love to hear from you in terms of, from a crit perspective, who do you think these races are for? From a road race, time trials, we would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. And especially if you've already been racing in these categories, what are your thoughts on this? Who do you think these races are for? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to do another Q&A, kind of riffing off that, even for next week. But, or if you're, indoor training like us and you think about erg mode, you think about Zwift, getting outside, how are you approaching these, indoor sessions, these winter miles, and how are you getting through them? We'd love to answer and kind of do a more Q&A next week. But until then, we will see you.
See you.